ran for president, was the Republican standard bearer 8 years ago. We'll see if we hear more from Trump tonight. What's interesting is when Pelosi put out her statement that Amber Phillips was talking about a couple minutes ago, she said, based on consultation with the Defense Department, the Justice Department, and the Vice President, we've decided to reconvene tonight. I'm hearing the Senate is going to come back in at 8 potentially. They're still ironing that out. It's wild that the Vice President is playing this role where he is doing what he sees correctly as his constitutional obligation, his sworn obligation. Meanwhile, the President is angry, and is kind of in isolation for all intents and purposes over at the White House. So it's this surreal question of who's really in charge right now. You had Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor, tweeting that he had just talked to Pence and things are under control. And it's sort of like, why isn't he talking to the president? What is the president doing? And so there has been this vacuum the last couple hours, and it is a vacuum of presidential leadership.
Well, one of the people filling that vacuum, James, is the president-elect Joe Biden. He did address the nation this afternoon, and Biden condemned the mob in what he called a god-awful display. He also called on the current president to step up. Let's listen.
I call on this mob to pull back and allow the work of democracy to go forward. You've heard me say before in different contexts, the words of a president matter, no matter how good or bad that president is. At their best, the words of a president can inspire. At their worst, they can incite. And therefore, I call on President Trump to go on national television now to fulfill his oath and defend the Constitution and demand an end to this siege, to storm the Capitol, to smash windows, to occupy offices, the floor of the United States Senate, rummaging through desks, on the Capitol, on the House of Representatives, threatening the safety of duly elected officials. It's not protest, it's insurrection. The world's watching. Like so many other Americans, I am genuinely shocked and saddened that our nation, so long the beacon of light and hope for democracy, has come to such a dark moment.
That was President-elect Joe Biden speaking earlier, and shortly after that, President Trump did put out a statement, but he did not do what Joe Biden and many others in the political ranks are calling on for him to do. While he told his supporters to go home, he also told them that he loved them and essentially supported what they're doing today and doubled down on his bogus claims that the election was fraudulent. He also called people who oppose him evil and enemies. That message, that video message, has now been taken down by Twitter. Let's go to Amber Phillips. We've been talking about this vacuum that Trump is leaving. There's a real question about what happens in the next 14 days, Amber, both who leads the country and also what everyone who works for the federal government does, what the vice president does, what military leaders do, as we watch the president deliver messages that continue to be so divorced from reality and so inflammatory.
Yeah, Libby, as you and James were outlining, there's a crisis of confidence in our leadership in this country, culminating at this point right now. And everybody that you just mentioned, from the vice president to the military to members of Congress, particularly Republicans,
says that they've just been told that the senators are going
to need to think through how they contribute to these next 14 days, because I think everyone has had a chance to watch these past few hours and realize that this did not happen out of the blue. There's not this historically awful attack on the U.S. Capitol like this without people enabling the president to do this. One thing I'm very interested in is Vice President Pence, of course, as James has pointed out. He seems to be stepping forward in taking leadership roles. We're hearing a little bit of that leak out when we hear lawmakers and national security officials try to reassure Americans that democracy will go on. Earlier today, Libby, when we had no idea, that we couldn't fathom that this was going to happen, Vice President Pence
That they don't want to do that anymore in light of all the very strong emotions
counted in Congress, and he issued a statement, his first public statement on this, and he said essentially, I'm not going to do what the president wants me to do. The Constitution doesn't allow me to do that. We know that angered the president, but it was also this rare moment from the vice president of complete and total separation from the president, an irreconcilable separation on the president's positions, and one that, you know, you could have argued this morning, and I think we did, might politically hurt Vice President Pence's future political aspirations. That started
has
the
called
day, okay,
reckless
and now
behavior.
the night is coming as Vice President Pence has had to be whisked out of the Capitol, his own safety in question, by supporters allegedly of his administration. I do not know, and I cannot pretend to know what is going through the vice president's head right now, but how does he move forward and lead? The other thing I want to say is that when I talk to military and national security experts, they tell me they have absolute confidence in the U.S. military to be representative of the American people, and not of a president, not of a commander-in-chief, but up to the Constitution. And we've heard military leaders say that as much. These national security experts I talked to are heartened by, ironically, what happened this summer when President Trump was very tough on Black Lives Matter protesters outside the White House, and then military leaders stood with them, with the president on that, and then they later said they regretted that. So experts I talked to have confidence in the military at this moment, at this crisis of confidence. And finally, there are some House lawmakers, Democrats, of course, right now, talking about impeachment. Representative Ilhan Omar, a Democrat from Minnesota, no friend of the president, has said from wherever she is right now, presumably safe, that she is drafting articles of impeachment against the president. I do not see any groundswell of support for that in Congress. I actually don't even know if there's time to get that done. I was just messaging a source of mine who studies the Constitution to ask about that. But this is all happening. All of this is happening right now in these couple of hours. You have Congress starting to step up. You have the vice president stepping forward with a little bit more leadership than the president. And then you have, national security experts saying that they're confident that the military will do the right thing in this moment.
Amber Phillips, reporter for The Fix, thank you so much. Let's bring in Annie Linsky, national political reporter, into this conversation. Annie, we've been talking about President-elect Joe Biden and his response today, calling on President Trump to speak and act, but also calling on this mob to disperse and leave the Capitol. You know, the Capitol is someplace near and dear to his heart. I mean, he knows those halls and the people who work there so well, Annie.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he served in the Senate for 36 years. He always says that he is of the Senate. It was a formative part of who he is. And so I think for him to see this, it was perhaps a little bit uniquely personal. I think everybody watching it was shocked and saddened and horrified. But, Joe Biden in particular is familiar with every nook and cranny of those buildings and that complex, and you just really saw the sadness and despair in his voice today when he spoke from Wilmington and said, and I think this was so important, that democracy is fragile, and what he saw was a clear attack on that. He faces such he already faced this incredibly uphill battle to unify the country, which is a central promise of his candidacy and a major piece of what he wants to accomplish as president. And that just became much more difficult, in the aftermath of today's events.
Annie, such a complicated day for the incoming Biden, Joe Biden, for the man himself, for him as well as his team, for Kamala Harris, because on a day where they had a huge win, they are also watching this attack on American democracy. The huge win, of course, the fact that both Democrats in the Senate runoff races have been projected to win. And so we expect to see a Senator Warnock and a Senator Ossoff. And so once Kamala Harris is sworn in as the vice president, and once those two men take their seats in the Senate, Democrats will hold the majority. That is a game changer to President-elect Joe Biden.
Well, it's so interesting that you mentioned that, because from the Biden team, the day started with this sort of unbelievable optimism. I mean, I was up at 6 o'clock in the morning texting my sources. I was up last night, texting with some of the Biden folks. They were just really, so thrilled, and saw this as an opportunity, not necessarily to enact their agenda, but to be heard. That they would have a chance, sort of a fresh chance, to bring their agenda at least to the floor of the House and the Senate. And it was unexpected to many of them. In the last few days, certainly they had indications that the races could go that way. But this morning, I spoke with Anita Dunn, a close advisor of Biden's. She was so optimistic. And, the hours later, you saw this terrible scene unfold in the Capitol, and that sense of excitement and optimism just really evaporated and turned into something much different, and a sort of sorrowful look at what has happened and what the kind of aftermath of this current presidency will be.
So Annie, we're hearing that Speaker Pelosi, in consultation with Vice President Pence, is going to proceed with the process tonight. And so we'll be watching for that to happen once the Capitol is safe and everything's secured and they're able to move forward. An attempt at normalcy and an attempt at getting past or showing Americans that they can work through this horrific moment. But what happens for President-elect Biden come tomorrow morning?
Well, I think it's the normalcy, the idea of a return to normalcy is so much more difficult now than it was before. What I think the best the House and Senate can do is show some sort of affirmation of our form of government and of democracy. If they can do that, talking to Biden's people, they had a plan in place just about anything except for this. I mean, they really wanted to move the debate along. They had been planning already to debate deep into the night, and had actually deputized Senator Klobuchar of Minnesota to take the lead on the Senate side in batting down some of the objections that they expected. And she had, along in consultation with other senators, determined that they were not going to take any breaks, that they were going to just debate this through, get it done through the night, and have this sort of moment and this certification of the Electoral College done as quickly as possible, so it wouldn't drag out. I mean, Biden's team clearly sees a disadvantage in the longer this lasts. So I think that's what you see here is this desire by the president-elect, and also clearly the House and Senate leaders, to put this past them, which had been part of Biden's plan. But oh my goodness, I don't think that this outcome is one that they seriously entertained. It's something that nobody thought would happen today.
Annie Linskey, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Let's go back to James Hohmann. James, okay, if we see the House and Senate resume the procedural efforts this evening, the big question is whether or not Republicans who began today saying they were going to challenge the legitimate results of this election will stand by that challenge. And obviously it remains to be seen. We haven't heard from some of them. I also want to point out, James, that as lawmakers emerge from their lockdown mode, we're seeing more of them share on social media their experiences and tell people that they're okay which is really, frankly, remarkable if you stop to think about that. We're having to hear from members of the House reassure us through Twitter that they are all right, that they're safe, that they're okay, and share their experiences of going into a lockdown. So I'm watching both those things right now.
Yeah, Libby, and so far Kathy McMorris Rodgers is the only person I've seen who's explicitly come out and put out a statement that said, "Look, I'm changing my position." But what you're seeing are some people who were sort of quiet or on the sidelines or had kept their powder dry, really amp up the rhetoric. Richard Burr, who's retiring, he is or I guess was the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee from North Carolina. And he put out a statement blaming Trump explicitly for this violence and for the insurrection, and calling on his colleagues to drop their objections and to move forward. So you're seeing a lot of very strong statements from people, the usual suspects like Mitt Romney. We obviously heard that speech from Mitch McConnell earlier. So I imagine that there's just immense pressure on the 14 to object. Now the challenge is, if you're Kelly Loeffler, you just lost re-election or election. She was appointed. She'd never won a full term. You promised when you were standing at the president's side at the rally on Monday night that you were going to challenge the Georgia results on January 6th. So if they can kind of pressure a lot of Republicans try to get this back in the bottle, do you back off of that and risk the president's ire, or risk the Trump allies, the kind of people who are here today blaming you for maybe letting the president lose in their warped view? So those are, I think, the dynamics at play. But there are these guys, and it's mostly men, although there are some women on the Senate side who are trying to overturn the election. They are all very accustomed to withstanding pressure from their colleagues. You look at someone like Ted Cruz, who shut down the federal government in 2013 in a quixotic effort to defund the Affordable Care Act. That drove other Republican senators nuts, and he didn't care. He forged ahead anyway and kind of made a mess for everyone. And so it's someone like Cruz who got 10 other senators to sign on to his statement challenging the results. Will he back down? If all these people are making cynical political calculations, Libby, if Cruz and Josh Hawley are thinking about 2024, you're sitting with your staff right now in a secure area, and you're trying to figure out how is this moment going to look, to an audience in Iowa in 2 years or 3 years, and to a national audience in 4 years. And will they remember it? Will they be talking about it? Will this define you? What do you do? It's sort of like right now people still talk about how Republicans responded to the Access Hollywood video when it came out in October 2016. What Republicans said and did in that it's 24 hours afterwards. So that's this sort of legacy-defining choice that's facing these Republicans when the Senate reconvenes at 8 o'clock.
One woman has died. We know that so far, James. Someone who was shot inside the Capitol building has died. There is a 6 p.m. curfew, and we're watching law enforcement to see what they do with those people who are breaking the curfew. People who invaded the U.S. Capitol building left, and so we'll be watching in the coming days and weeks to see how law enforcement tracks those people down and what they do with them. I want to read, you mentioned Senator Burr's statement, James. I just want to read that to just to just emphasize how some Republicans are choosing to respond to this moment. Senator Burr wrote, "The president bears responsibility for today's events by promoting the unfounded conspiracy theories that have led to this point." So squarely placing blame on what happened today on President Trump and the conspiracy theories that he has not only passively allowed, but actively encouraged and created himself, James.
Yeah, and remember that McConnell speech, which I think will be remembered as this powerful moment where McConnell stood up for democracy. But even that was full of false equivalency and attacking Democrats and attacking the media and all kind of threading the needle, saying that maybe there definitely was fraud, but it wasn't widespread and wouldn't change the outcome. It was kind of if you take aside kind of the money sound bites from that speech, there was a lot of kind of nods to Trump and the Trump base. There's no nods like that in this statement from Richard Burr, and that's I think, the kind of thing that will shape the consideration of these senators as they try to decide, okay, like, is my political career going to be defined by going down, with the ship that Trump was on in the final 2 weeks he was in power? And it is hard to know how these things play out, but it's moments like these that really end up defining politicians and how they will be remembered.
I want to show you a tape of a mob of Trump supporters swarming the media near the United States Capitol. The mob shouted a phrase you might know if you listen to President Trump's rallies, that the media is the enemy of the people. This mob destroyed equipment and chased out reporters. Let's watch. Video taken earlier today as Trump supporters damaged equipment owned by media organizations. We'll certainly be watching to see if those people are prosecuted for what they did. James, it starts with the President of the United States making fun of reporters, mocking a disabled reporter, calling reporters enemies, threatening them, making jokes about them dying, tweeting images of them being murdered, and we see it escalate over time. We're seeing that today. The theft, the chasing of journalists who are just doing their job, and the destruction of their